As always, Anoop, please let me know when you think we should start. Probably a few more minutes, but then I'll start.
Can you hear me? Okay. Very good afternoon to all of you. Yeah, very good afternoon to all of you. So this is our ninth day, and we're going to discuss more about responsible research and innovation. And also, we have planned to have one presentation of students. So I have already received some of the names. So whoever is interested and did not mention his or her name, please mention on the chat panel so that I can include your name in the presenters list.
I'm sorry, sir. Is it compulsory to present or?
No, this is not compulsory. This is purely voluntary basis. So there is no compulsion to present any any presentation or anything, any working paper or anything. But I think you can learn more from us. So if you present, and you can also have discussion with the other participants. I already got names of Shati Kumari and Priyanka, and they are present in this session. So over to you, Professor Robert Brown.
Thank you very much. As usual, a very warm welcome. Morning. So good morning, good afternoon to you. This is our penultimate day. So we have one more day to go. I hope you are enjoying this course as it nears to its end. Before I start today, I want to reflect on something that we have been discussing yesterday. I think it was Asta who called our attention to, within the frame of decolonization, to the regime of copyrights and also to plagiarism, and how it was a colonizing practice. And I have the privilege, for many ways, to have a wife who is a copyright lawyer, or media and copyright lawyer. So I went home in the evening and reflected on what Ashta said. And she said, absolutely, this is absolutely so. Not only is it so that it's already acknowledged by WIPO, which is the Global Institution of Copyrights, and I put in the chat their explanation and also their recommendation that certain forms of alternative indigenous knowledge should also receive copyright protection, one of which is actually traditional medicine in India, or ways of traditional medicine in India. So thank you very much for that comment. I hope it was Ashta, and I'm not falsely putting this on her. So anyway, plagiarism and copyright issues are a topic that one can discuss within this Western knowledge framework. And obviously, if we're talking about open science, if we're talking about open access, if we're talking about many of the things that a responsible research and innovation framework entails, we cannot forget that much of what we discuss in terms of responsibility has its origins not only from a political ideology point of view, as I have pointed out, in the 17th century scientific revolution and the politics of science thereafter, but also certain regimes also stem from this origin, mainly from the following industrial revolution that followed the scientific revolution and the capitalist governing rationality that is at its core. So I just wanted to reflect on this. So I will, anyone wants to add something to this? Okay, so if nobody, please read the text that I put in the chat, which reflects on this what I've just told you. I hope you see my screen, which now is, I hope, in full screen mode. Is it in full screen?
Yeah, it's now full screen.
Okay, thank you very much. Today, I will talk about not really a case study, but a research area which I'm working in specifically, which is mobility and even more specifically automobility. And I want to discuss this in terms of what I have theorized throughout this course. And I want to discuss this not really, as I said, as a case study, but a specific area which I hope you can connect with and understand how the critical thinking or radically critical thinking that I am trying to introduce here can be applied to specific area of technology society confluence. Here is our definitional pane, just to be reminded: taking care of the future through collective stewardship, and also societal actors working together during the whole research and innovation process, definitely in order to align the outcomes and process with the values, needs, and expectations of society. So question is, obviously, how can we do that? And definitely, how can we do that in this specific frame that I try to present to you, which let's call it ontologization or the ontopolitics of research and innovation. So another turn, you're probably fed up with the turns that I am bringing to you. This is here another turn, which is called the mobilities turn. And I will be discussing mobilities and responsible research and innovation, how I understand it. So what's the new mobilities paradigm, or as some of the researchers call it, it's a mobilities ontology. John Urry and Mimi Scheller, who are the preeminent scholars within the mobilities frame, in their seminal paper talk about a new mobilities paradigm, pretty much paradigm, you know, the Kuhnian concept, the way of seeing, arguing that in the 20th century, late 20th, early 21st century, we came to realize that the new way of seeing is that all the world seems to be on the move. And such movement is validating a new type of social science that they call the mobilities paradigm, instead of looking at socialities, the social and the human, in terms of their stationary being, we should discuss, reflect, interrogate the world that is on the move. And they say that thus we can distinguish between what they call the new mobilities paradigm in social science and a new paradigm of mobility that is in the world. And this world that is on the move is the new paradigm of mobility in the world. The new mobilities paradigm in the social sciences is a collection of epistemic or ontological constructs that allow us to theorize and empirically studies this world that is on the move and this world that has to come to possess a new paradigm of mobility. So from migration to automobility, from cargo mobility or aerial mobility to viruses, to networks, to digitalization, everything, they argue, can be framed within this mobilities paradigm. Basically, that everything is on the move. While one can argue that this is not a big deal, this is what I mentioned as actually spatialized transcendence, because we know, and this is really basic physics, that everything is on the move. The smallest, from the smallest to the biggest, everything is moving and has always been moving. So from a nature point of view on which a social scientist is looking upon, this may not be anything new. However, the new mobilities paradigm would argue that there should be a new social science that takes up this new paradigm, that looks upon the world as the world is moving. While we may see things that are stationary, in real life or in actuality, everything is on the move. And everything is on the move is not only being on the move with things or infrastructures, but also everything is on the move that we don't see or we don't experience. And this also validates or warrants our reflection. So this is kind of the big framework in which, or the big academic scientific framework that I am talking within. My area of research is automobility, and thus, if it were my mother who would ask, okay, Robert, this is wonderful. She's 88 years old. So this is wonderful. I hear that you're working in automobility, but what is actually different from your version of automobility than what I think, again, she being 88, as, for instance, what's a car, she would ask. And, you know, she would suggest me to look up in the Oxford Dictionary, and the Oxford Dictionary explains what a car is. A car is a road vehicle with an engine and 4 wheels that can carry a small number of passengers. However, I would answer my mother that this is all good. However, in the new mobilities paradigm, or rather in a new mobilities ontology, when we actually look at things in their ontological being having been constructed within the mobilities ontology, maybe the car is not a road vehicle that has an engine, 4 wheels, etc. But from an ontological, and you know that ontology discusses being, it's actually a composite cyborg. My mother would look at me, a composite cyborg? What the hell is that? A composite cyborg, I would explain her, is a complicated phenomena. Is a complicated phenomena, composite as it is from a human and a technology, this technology itself being a composite. So it's not as simple as the Oxford Dictionary would have it, that it's a vehicle that has certain characteristics like wheel and engine, etc., and a certain function like carrying people. But this agency, as we have learned in this course, is much more distributed amongst the different parts that are also only imagined as being part of this composite that is the cyborg. We can call it the car driver cyborg, we can call it many things, but what's important here is that within this new mobility ontology, something new is to be born, or a new form of being is reflected upon, and this is the cyborg. And from this ontology, it follows that when we want to understand what this actually is, we want to generate knowledge about it, then we should treat it within the frame of technoscience, technology and science. So it's created by our awareness of technology and science, that is our awareness of technoscience, and our focus is itself being an actant that is both part of a distributed network of agency, but also itself being a cyborg within it, having some form of distributed agency. So we're shifting its politics from the ontology and the epistemology that the Oxford Dictionary would have to a very different politics. And we would argue that this cyborg or technoscientific actant is actually one important agent in the political order of late modernity. So my definition, which is very different from the Oxford Dictionary, is that a car is actually a composite cyborg that is a technoscientific actant, and its politics is being an agent in the order, the political order of late modernity. I'm not 100% sure that my mother would be so very happy with this definition. Still, I think this is a much better way of understanding what a car is than the description that is provided to us by the Oxford Dictionary. From the car, we may move to this political order, that is the order of late modernity. And I would argue that automobility is a very specific political order within late modernity. Here are some definitions of different scholars, myself included, with my co-author Richard Randall. You know that we have a book coming out in a few weeks on post-automobility. So John Urry, who is the eminent scholar of mobility, unfortunately died a few years ago, would call automobility as a self-organizing, autopoietic, self-generating, non-linear system that spreads worldwide. It includes a number of things: cars, drivers, roads, supplies, and many other objects, technologies, and science. So he would see it as a non-linear system. However, Stefan Boehm and some of his co-authors would argue that automobility is not a system, that is, it's not a causal complex relationship of agents and things, but it is actually a regime, a political regime that is shaping and producing new types of people consistent with its logics. So he would already see automobility as a political regime that subjectifies people into specific roles or types and enacts them within this regime. Katharina Manderscheid, who is a Foucauldian scholar of mobility, would call automobility as an apparatus, very much along the lines of what you heard from Foucault as the dispositive. So she would call it as an apparatus of dispersed and decentralized power, which consists of automobile landscape, discourses, governance, and specific subjectivity, as well as mobility practice. And we call it a nomocratic thanato-political order. And both words are very important. Nomocratic comes from Carl Schmitt's idea of nomos, and I'll talk about that in a little while, but basically it's appropriated space, appropriated for a specific purpose and in a very specific way through violence that is both occluded and bracketed, and that is made to be accepted, violence being made accepted. And it is thanatopolitical in the sense that its main and most important drive is death. So it's not efficiency, it's not freedom, but it is actually the possibility of contingent death. This is what thanatos alludes to. So if we kind of look at a bird's eye view of these different scholars trying to understand what automobility is, what seems to me as a connecting element is that it's complex. It entails both things and people, and both things and people are as much reflected or represented in as much as they're made to be by automobility. And this making is of a political kind. It makes people, subjectivities, but it also makes things. And this making is not only political in the generic terms, but it is very specific in its politics, because the driver or the power within, or the constitutive power within this form of politics is violence. And I'll explain what this actually means. So the order of late modernity, which I think is a global and hegemonic order, one of many, but it is both global and hegemonic. Automobility is actually a political construct that is operated by violence. What is this order? How did it become? It's very interesting, because one would think, not knowing actually the history of automobility, that automobility was always like we know it today. However, my key argument is that automobility was not born, was not a given or deterministic construct once the Industrial Revolution led to the invention of the combustion engine. And that combustion engine was placed on a chariot, that is a four-wheeler mobility device, and such the car. And then when the car spread, automobility was born. But actually, it's pretty man-made. It has been brought into the world by a specific type of politics. And this very specific type of politics first actually saw the car as an extremely dangerous device that intruded into the city. And in the first decade of automobility, that is the 1910s, there were immense fights to stop it. There were anti-car protests, banning and blocking cars. However, there were agents who were having a vested interest in developing automobility as the political order of late modernity. One of the ways to do this was actually a semiotic device that's called jaywalking. It was an invention that, you know what jaywalking means? Jaywalking means that you step off your confined space, that is the pavement, onto the other confined space, that is the road. And this was illegal. Not only was it illegal, but jaywalking in the 1930s entered into the dictionary as this specific word describing a specific activity that a human could commit when transgressing the confines of the space that was allocated to him or her. And obviously, this was the moment when clearly automobility started to spread the world over. Today, there are more than 70 million kilometers of roads. And as you are probably aware, every 13 seconds, somebody dies. That adds up to almost 2 million people annually dying and another 100 million being injured within automobility, which again adds up to approximately 80 million people having died within automobility, which means this is more people dead than all the wars of the 20th and 21st century combined. All the wars killed approximately 65 million people in the 20th and 21st centuries. So automobility has killed and definitely injured more people. And this is one of the reasons why we're saying that violence is its key operator. So what is the world? Because if we are talking about an ontology, then obviously it's not only the order that matters, but how this politics became that order that is the world in which we are coerced to live. I argue that this is a very specific world out of many potential worlds. This world is a flattened, large ensemble of relations of things and humans that is transformed, that has transformed reality to fit those coerced modes of problem solving that are visible to engineers, and in its engineering, its artifacts, rule books, and technologies of governance. And it is managed by policing and imagining such an order. So this world was created by the imagination of engineers. There are artifacts, but also there are humans and non-humans that are created by, this is the cyborg I alluded to, are created by this world. And within this world, humans have become subjected to live at a permanent threshold of an extremely dangerous political regime that is of discipline and control, but more importantly, that has become accepted as normal, unremarkable, and proper. This is what we apprehend whenever we're confronted with the necessity to cross a street. So, within the world that is automobility, I argue that space has become appropriated, creating a very specific type of order that has bracketed violence and has made such violence invisible within what we call the imaginary of automobility. And if this, since I'm talking to you guys, if this definition reminds you of what settler colonialism is, then it's by no mistake. I argue that the world that has been created as the political order of late modernity, that is automobility, is by its basic ontological and epistemic, that is political structure, very similar to that of settler colonialism. It's similarly a flattened ensemble of relations into which people are coerced into. It's a regime of extreme discipline and control in which people have to live at the permanent threshold of bracketed violence that, however, is both made invisible, but also normal, unremarkable, and proper. So those 80 million and counting that have and are dying by automobility are occluded and made to be accepted as normal, unremarkable, and proper. So, where does this leave us? What kind of critical thinking should, could, may address the things that I have said up till today? So, meet Mr. Carl Benz. I'm pretty sure it's a name you know or you're familiar with. He was the guy who patented the motor car in 1885. That is considered to be the first practical automobile. He received a patent for this motor car in 1886. So, if you were Carl Benz, or if we met in real life, Carl Benz, with all this critical awareness that we have today, if you accept what I'm trying to say, what would we have told him? Or what could we tell him? Should he do something different? Should he not do what he has done? So, before I carry on and show you some of the critical thinking, I want to ask you if you're with me, and what do you think? Given what I've just told you, what should he do differently? Could he do anything differently? Or what should we do, knowing all what we know now about the invention that Mr. Carl Benz brought to life? So I'll stop sharing. Does anyone have any ideas, comments, what have you? First of all, do you agree that automobility is, or can you, it's not an agreement. Can you imagine that this description that I have presented to you about automobility can be imagined to be a correct one? Anyone? Ashish, go ahead.
Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Now, since I have experiences of walking on the road in a place like, Southwest London, where you can actually stop the traffic by the touch of a button in order to make sure the pedestrian actually crosses the road. And that would include categories of people like people on a wheelchair or on an automotive vehicle, which more senior citizens use. So that is one ontology that I would talk of. Then there is the sharp contrast provided by my own developing country context. Mobility is situated within immobility. I'll give you a classical example. The repair work that's done on the roads, right? It is a proper function of the road. It is an artifact which is associated with the whole idea of automobility. The manner in which the flow of traffic goes on a particular road, depending on whether it's a road next to your home, whether it's a road next to a highway, actually determines whether repair work can actually be carried out in the first place. So in a sense, it is both politically dictated by the user as a majority of people who have been specially constructed, as in the automobile owner. Now, until a few years ago, there were attempts in our country to have a bus rapid transit system, which is called as a transit-oriented development model, in which they had prioritized the movement of buses over other categories of traffic. Now, in doing so, there were huge societal frictions on the point as to why a bus needs to be prioritized as a form of public transport or a mass rapid transit means. So in the shaping of that idea, the way the courts responded to it, the way people responded to the whole idea, the road and the associated artifacts, even the traffic light, like for the institutionalist, the traffic light is the signal of when to stop, when to go, when is it safe to do, certain things. Now, in the Indian context, you have this classical situation of urban sprawl, where you'll have all sorts of hawkers and vendors across the both sides of the street, coupled with squatting, or what you may call as badly parked cars, and there is no provision for like stopping the traffic at the press of a button like we have in London. And the control and discipline that you were talking about means undoubtedly, I do not know about discipline, but I'm sure it's definitely a case of a control and command situation, because even the traffic light has a timer. In India, the traffic light has a timer, and I can really give you examples of all those situations in which these autonomous vehicles that you have written about in your Futurama's paper will actually break down, because there's such a decontextualization of the decision-making heuristic, as to the movement of that one vehicle is subject to the decisions of the other drivers or the other agents in the system. That if you were to implement autonomous vehicles in our country, it would actually be a nightmare. So I fully agree with what you're trying to put across. Means in terms of the chaos, if there's something called as the chaos of movement, that pretty much comes across in the theoretical concepts that you're putting across. I can actually imagine a street in Delhi as well as a street in London, and perhaps a street in high street New York, perhaps, since I've had a brief experience of seeing those roads also. So I do definitely know that the amount of control and discipline, the impacts on other actors, and the whole, the fact that it's not a system. Because if it would have been a system, there would have been a sense of organization to it. It is hardly systemic. It appears like a system, but it is organized chaos. Basically, I can put it down to that.
Yes, thank you very much. These are excellent examples. Even if I would go further, saying that obviously the road itself and the connections established are parts of not only crossing the road and the lights, etc., but the roads themselves are part of the discipline and the control, because it creates such interactions in this flattened map that is the road. There is a wonderful philosopher called Lefebvre who talks about how roads inscribe space into how the map and our Euclidean thinking of connections are reproduced and made real by inscribing what we see on the map into our present and complex realities. So while, and your example of chaos is a beautiful one, because I think what we traditionally imagine as mobility to be is chaos. Everything goes everywhere in every direction. However, roads are institutionalized to place order into this chaos. And it's fascinating, as you describe it, that instead of putting in order, actually it enhances the entropy in the system. So it's a very nice example. Let me continue, and thank you for your comment. I need to share my screen. Here is my screen. Do you see full screen?
Not yet.
Oh, not yet. Okay, then I have to do something. I don't know why you don't see full screen. Do you see it now? Yes. You should be seeing full screen now.
Actually, 2 slides are visible.
Pardon?
2 slides are visible, one big and one small.
Okay. How about now?
No, still in the same mode. You have to press the full screen button, I think, at the end of
How about now?
the bigger screen is big.
This is very strange.
Maybe you should press the next button, next one. So, back below the bigger slide, there is one button that says full screen. Yeah, under this. If you close your slideshow and then open it again and share, then I think it will become full screen.
Okay, that's what I'm going to do. Okay.
Okay. Now it's okay.
So here we are with Mr. Benz. So let's see what this entails, what I'm trying to say. I'm arguing that there is an ontopolitical war going on within automobility. There is a division of what I call the ontological labor. There are a series of socio-technical imaginaries, the modernist, the realist, the epistemic, the ontological imaginaries flying around. And there's a constant movement of engineering that wants to add new and new elements to these imaginaries, arguing that it's just technology. There is nature still out there, don't worry. However, we think that not only current, but also electric, connected, autonomous, and flying vehicles are part of this ontopolitical war, and they are adding and creating new elements within this command and control, discipline and control political setup that is automobility. Part of the ontopolitical war is the argument that automobility is just about the car, it's about the road. And as such, and I loved Ashish's comment, it's just a system that can always be more orderly. That is, it's a system that can be bettered. And there is a automobility truth within the frame of the literary, and this is how accidents are explained away. And accidents are explained away within what's called causation reports, which argue, as I do or we do in our paper on the Futuramas, that there is a system called the driver-vehicle environment connection within this system, explaining away that at the heart of those accidents that I have mentioned, or violence rather, it is always, or 93% of the time, which is almost always, is the culpable driver who is operating a disinterested technology. And this obviously creates social exclusion, which not only excludes lay people from the development, but it's interesting how Ashish called it, that it is the users who are excluded. And in my language, this means that lay people are subjectified into being, or being understood as, users only. Their personhood is flattened and limited to being users of not only the car, but users of a system. There's a metaphysics operated by stealth. There is obviously an amount of engineering solutionism. The world is seen as a world in deficiency. Carl Benz actually saw it as a world in deficiency that needs a quick fix technological solution, that is a automobile. It's obviously seen as no cyborg or no hybrid entities, but it's seen the car is the car is the car, to paraphrase Sylvia Plath, and it has created the driver that is a human, that is always culpable. When I said that accidents are occluded, we see that anytime violence happens, then the road is cleared, the accidents are naturalized, violence is bracketed, and everything is shoved away to be reassembled in hospitals or in car repair shops, away from the gaze of the lay people, or away from the gaze of the people who would be participating in this political system that is automobility. And obviously a lot of it is black boxing, creating the driver computer environment, black box complex and autonomous driving, individualizing, which is of course Deleuze's concept of splitting up the individual in cyberspace into datafied objects. But this is kind of our future to come. So when we did a number of workshops to connect this to the social lab process, here are some quotes that people actually said. I never thought about responsibility besides finding a solution to the problem. This is an engineer talking. For me, this was never seen as an ontology. This was never seen as a world created. This was never seen as a political order. It was always seen as a problem that presents itself to me. And my responsibility is not to address heuristically this world, but my challenge is to address the problem at hand. I now understood, another participant said, I now understood that if society is so complex, then this should also go into technology. So if society is not only made up, to refer to our example, of people who use the car, but there are citizens, there are mothers, there are school kids, there are multiple forms of subjectivities, not only those that automobility coerces as a regime us into. Therefore, if society is complex, somehow this should be represented in technology itself. And another participant in the social lab said, I thought if I am acting ethically, that I weigh the bads and the goods in my practice, that's enough. I did not anticipate other consequences that actually I am creating this thanatopolitical order by engineering those bits and pieces that go into the technology that will then kill people. While this is not something he or she said, one can argue that anyone who is not reflecting upon these options will also become part of the thanatopolitical order, and thus is as much culpable as the driver. That is, at any one moment, it is argued that drives the car and is at fault in most of the accident situations. So let's go back to how this is imagined. The European Commission, new mobility strategy. It's based on the myth, I know, I'm an engineer, suggests that mobility in Europe should be based on an efficient and interconnected multimodal transport system for both passengers and freight. So this means that we have to create an affordable high-speed link network by abundant recharging and refueling infrastructure for zero-emission vehicles. I hope you're upset. I hope that you're upset because this means that what actually the European Commission is suggesting is what's called a weighing. With affordable high-speed rail and abundant recharging and refueling infrastructure for zero-emission vehicles, electric, this means that the current troubles that automobility has created is weighed and sent from the global north to the global south, both in forms of the used cars, which are substituted by electric cars, are pushed away to the global south, but also the energy that is being used here and without using fossil fuels within the combustion engine on the road, that is creating the fumes that will then kill an additional 400,000 people in respiratory diseases. That's called a form of violence called slow violence. It is weighed and pushed to the global south because that's where such energy is then coming from. This is where the extractivism which builds batteries is coming from, and this is where batteries are stored and where their life cycle ends. So what the European Commission does, here you have another form of colonialism, trying to push the bats from the global north, that is Europe, to the global south, part of which is obviously India, but also Africa. So when you hear that electrification of mobility systems is good, always think of this. It's the same bloody imaginary, the same bloody political system. It's the political ontology that has been built in and by automobility. Also, it is argued that digitalization and automation will further increase the levels of safety, security, reliability, and comfort, which again, not only as Ashish has alluded, will create more chaos. It will create more automobility. It will create more danger. It will, instead of creating levels of safety and security, it will create structures in which human decisions are handed over to machines that are black boxed, that are biased, and that will cause more harm than the harms that we see today in automobility. So the I know I am an engineer myth is actually another form of the solutionism that we see in current practice in automobility. So what do we make of John Urry's self-organizing, autopoietic, non-linear system that spreads worldwide? As we said, it's a political order, so we should look at it as such. At its core is speed that is fictionally mobilized as efficiency. We argue that people are confined in space, they're logged in technology, and they're engulfed in a very specific form of political imaginary by different agents who set up and have created or had more agency in creating this world that is automobility. What is mobility being in this world? Paul Virilio, famous philosopher of the late 20th century, argues that there was no industrial revolution, only democratic revolution. There is no democracy, only democracy. Democracy is stemming from the Greek word dromos, that means speed. So space is not a map we move on, as I described, but it is also meanings, relations, emotions, feelings, and aspirations. Movement in space is creating meaning in and for our life, and not only getting us from A to B. So what we need to think or rethink, for instance, is addressing speed, fast and slow, within the frame of human time. One of the ways this can be done, based on a more inclusive and integrative approach, is the concept of the commons. Not only is the physical the commons, but it's also the political that is a commons. Hardin, famous theorist of the tragedy of the commons, argues that each man is logged into a system that compels him to increase his herd without limit in a world that is seen as unlimited. Ostrom, who got a Nobel Prize for her theory of the commons, or economics of the commons, argues, common pool resources rather. She argues that we need a governance of natural resources used by many individuals in common. That is an issue of increasing concern to policy analysts. We need to solve the problems of what she called common pool resources. And I argue that mobility is such a common pool resource, and automobility is not the way how such common pool resource should be dealt with. Hard and Negri argue that the commonwealth of the material world, in the form of what they call commoning, also and more significantly results in social production that is necessary for social interaction and further production. That is knowledges, languages, codes, information, effects, and so forth. So we need a commons approach to mobility, the right to be mobile, the right to be immobile, the right not to be displaced, an awareness of the social production of mobility and the power relations that are inherent, and a commitment to creating equity and working in the interest of the public good that the commons is all about. One would ask, who is commoning? And when I say it's the layperson who should govern, and not the engineer, and not those agents who have been active in creating this world, then strange enough, I allude to a very specific form of political being called the idiot. And you will be very surprised who the idiot is. The idiot is a layperson in Greek politics who entered occasionally, but did not become a professional politician, but entered into politics with his or her opinion. In Athens, obviously, it was a he. That Landauer, the theorist of the Idiotes, calls an amateur who does not have the power to harm the city. So there are idiots, that is you and me, lay people, who are not experts or engineers, who are not interested in solutions, but interested in well-being, and understands that the commons is for and of everyone. Nobody is privileged to be in a position to govern the commons. And the ambition is not to solve problems, but to save the commons. And this is our common wealth. So in my world, responsible research and innovation addresses the ontology. The ontology, that is the world that has been created within the paradigm of mobility. Automobility is a political system. It is a political regime that coerces, occludes, and is operated by power violence. And therefore, when we talk about post-automobility, it is not a world without cars, but it's a different political order. And this political order should be governed by justice, equity, sustainability, and democracy, as I have been arguing. And this can only be done if it's not the problem solver, mythic figure of the engineer expert that is governing and running the show and creating this ontology that is automobility, but the layperson who is an idiot not in the sense of its modern meaning, but in the sense of its ancient Greek meaning. And you'll tell me if a similar figure existed in India, who is an amateur, who is engaged in politics, but does not have the professional imagination and imaginary to be able to harm the city or the polity that is comprised of the commons. And this commons is both the people and the things that are in this relation that we call the commons. So this is my story for today. This is how what I have been telling you about understanding science, understanding research and innovation seen as a political ontology would mean when translated into a critical ontopolitical thinking of one domain, that is automobility. Tomorrow, in one of my final presentations, I'll do the same with data and datafied ontopolitics. Thank you so much. Your comments, questions, ideas, welcome. I know it's a lot. I know that I've been throwing all this onto you, but I'm all ears what you make of this. Swati, please. This is definitely your field of research.
Yeah. Just one clarification. When you talk about automobility, like you mean like individual privatized vehicles, or you mean like any kind of like system which has been built, like whether rail networks or everything like?
Thank you for the question. Excellent question. It allows me to clarify. I mean everything. Everything. Everything is included in automobility. Automobility is the global, hegemonic, coercive order of late modernity in which we live. So this is the world we live in. Is this the only world? No. There are multiple worlds we live in. Why do I call it a world? I call it a world because a world is a setup in which world-specific entities, both human and non-human, exist. And in this world that is automobility, and I know this is going far in the direction of philosophy, but I think it's important that you understand. In this world that is automobility, it's not those kinds that we're used to be in other worlds exist, humans, non-humans, things, but it is different kinds, cyborgs, agents that are non-living, relations that are visible, relations that are invisible, relations that are occluded. And it is a world that has been created by multiple agents and agencies, also at the core of which I believe is constitutive violence. This world is operated by constitutive violence. As I said, in my way of thinking, this is not the only world. And one then might ask, okay, so that means that we're living in a multi-world world. And my answer would be yes, we are. Automobility is one, and there are many other worlds that we are coerced into living, all of which with different political orders, with different constitutive elements that are governing its relationships, different constitutive elements that create the types of entities that populate that world. And this is what a decolonizing way of imagination rather than thinking would entail. I hope I answered the question,
Yeah,
Swati.
thank you.
Saradindu, you're next on my screen. And sorry to call people on the order that I see them. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was really the first one, but I don't mind being, at the receiving end of the privilege this time. Yeah, thanks very much, Robert. I mean, once again, a very thought-provoking thing. I mean, I would like to particularly draw your attention to the two things that you mentioned. One is about the common, the commoner, the idiot, and the question of violence. Now, keeping
and
these
the question of
violence,
violence. Yes.
violence.
Okay.
So I'll just keep these three, if you call them the parameters, in mind, and would like to provoke you to say a few things about, the so-called Indian Jugaad vehicle, where you make a vehicle out of maybe taking a parts from a scooter, another part from a tractor, and still another from a Mercedes-Benz, discarded parts. Put them together, make a vehicle out of it, and they run on Indian roads. Now, why is it important to me? Because, of course, they are being made not by trained engineers, and engineers actually don't like these things, but they are still being made by people who are idiots in the sense that they don't have any formal training. It's perhaps not violent because it can cause more harm to the person who is using it than the person who is probably standing in front of it, because the car can collapse, causing harm to the driver more than the other persons. And so to the question that I have is, this is once again a kind of frugal innovation for me, which I'm interested in. One of the students who is doing his PhD on this. How do you, in my own expression, how do you create a dialogue with these innovations from your responsible innovation point of view? Thanks. Yeah, that's all.
I think this is a wonderful comment. And when I was in India, This is exactly what I've been thinking about. How do these, let's call them frugal innovations, frugal individual innovations, because I think that's also relevant, that they are not one size fits all, frugal as they are, but there are frugal innovations that are industrially frugal, and still follow a one size fits all pattern. But this example that you've mentioned are not. And yes, this is exactly what I mean by an idiot, a layperson who doesn't have the power to harm the city. He might have the power to harm himself, also harm himself temporarily, and in a limited way, and that does not create what I call ontological violence, because what I try to conceptualize in automobility is not the accident. It's not the traditional understanding of physical violence that happens, but rather the potentiality, the ingrained power that operates or holds together and makes the world durable. And that type of violence, which is multifold, physical only one, but also slow violence through to pollution and other health impacts, but also epistemic violence, othering and saming and repressing certain forms of mobilities on the cost of others, having some types of mobilities silenced and made subaltern in a very traditional Spivakian sense, ontological violence, inscribing certain power to certain forms of violence that are not contingent, but that are parts of how the cyborg entities are created. I am an ardent biker. I bike everywhere. And obviously, the cyborg that is me biking is a very different type of entity with a very different type of ontological position, violence, related to violence, than that of a car driver cyborg. I am next week just presenting at a conference about cycling trauma, and I interpret cycling trauma as an ontological trauma. It is there anytime and anywhere within the cyclist or the bicyclist cyborg, because this trauma of being the subaltern in the context within automobility is the constant experience driven by fear, driven by unwell-being, etc. So how does this relate to what you mentioned in the specific frugal innovation? I think that those cyborgs that are created by these idiots, if they were the only modes of mobility, it would be a very different political setup. And thus, I think this is one other connection, maybe in need of more theorization, but this is definitely another connection between RRI and frugal innovation, at least from the vantage point as I see RRI and frugal innovation, because I think the ontology behind engineering and behind the idiotes, that is the idiot, is a very different ontology. And the ontology that is created by automobility as opposed to the world that is created by the multiple actors who are engaged in this frugal innovation processes, I think is a very different world. and to my mind, actually a much better world, because this ontological violence element is, I think, without going deep into the theory, I think is missing. I don't know if this was a good enough answer to you.
Indeed, indeed. I mean, thanks for clarifying the concept of violence that you are using, and that sort of helps me think more deeply about it. Maybe with respect to certain parameters, for example, maybe pollution, it may be not very clear in terms of whether they are less violent or more. But on the other things of sort of challenging the dominant narrative, not being seen as the subaltern, the possibility of not harming the city because it doesn't operate in that scale, etc., could surely be the major elements of that alternative narrative.
Saradindu, I have bad news for you.
Oh yeah, please.
This is something we have to write up together.
Oh, it will be, yeah, actually we should, no?
Absolutely.
This is a
great idea. This is a great idea, and I think we should work on this some more. It's according to my plan, this is to be discussed tomorrow, future collaboration across the board, but this I made note of this. This is a wonderful idea to explore. And I think just one remark, and this is also interesting, because obviously what you have in mind is a frugal innovation that has to be integrated, and this is how the imaginary of that idiot is when he or she constructs this vehicle that is frugal, that it has to be inserted into this political ontology that is automobility. Therefore, it has to acquire a certain speed. It has to acquire a certain propellant that is available, as you said, to be stolen from the yard, etc. So it is not accidental in this sense that this frugal innovation will be maybe more polluting, because it needs to use bits and pieces that are already there within automobility, but also it has to be imagined to be workable within this democratic, that is speedy system that is automobility. So I think, again, frugal innovation, and this is connecting what I answered to Swati, frugal innovation within mobility as we know it today can only be imagined within this totality that is automobility. And I think this is how automobility as a totality coerces other forms of bringing things into being, one of which is frugal innovation. That frugal innovation that you allude to or you have in mind actually has to be fit to be incorporated in this political order that is automobility. So the big question is, can the frugal innovation agent be also an agent of change, in the sense that by his or her agency of creating a frugal innovation, that frugal innovation will not be imagined as being part of this violent setup, but would be something very different, and thus would create a new world, an alternative world. And I think this is the big question, and this is what paradigm changes are all about. This is, and also, and this is your turf, not mine, but you know, Carl Benz, when inventing the car, he didn't want to create a world, obviously. He couldn't have imagined creating a world. So I think the ingenious setup of frugal innovations on a much larger scale would mean that without imagining being transformative, You may also be, with its scale, with its numbers, with its sheer new imagination of not one size fits all, and many other things. So I think, at least from the vantage point I look at this, I think it is possible to theorize, and this is what I hope we will do together. It is possible to theorize frugal innovation as potentially an alternative world maker.
Yeah, let's think more on this. Yeah, that's an interesting entry point too.
Okay. So thank you. This is great. Asta, you're next. Asta, are you here?
Yes, I'm here, starting my video.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment regarding the discussion that we have been having in relation to violence. So, my observation is that the very conception of science has been as a conquest over nature. So there is violence embedded in the very worldview on which modern science and technology is based. And any innovation, it needs to address the problem of violence, needs to address the basic philosophy underlying, the worldview. The worldview, that is, this narrative of conquesting nature is a prevalent narrative that is dominant in science, and I just wanted to make this comment.
Thank you. This is a wonderful comment, and two further comments from my side. One, I'm not 100% sure that I am in agreement with you that modern science has been contesting nature. Rather, it has created nature as something that is different from the social or the cultural. I think that nature is not natural. Nature is just as much constructed within this worldview that you alluded to. So, and I'm a philosopher, so I have to watch my language. So when I would say modern science, although I do agree or I do understand what you mean, has been contesting nature, that would mean that I would accept that nature is a different type of construct than that of society, which is the contestant. And what I try to argue, that nature, that is the view, that there is something out there that is original, that is not man-made, that exists independently of the human or even other beings. I think that that's just as much a construct of our imagination than anything else. So I would rather go along when we talk about violence. I would rather go along these lines of Heidegger that I have been quoting, that thinking, so this constructing nature as an independent domain, ontological domain, is the violence that humans have committed. And so, as Heidegger says, thinking, that is human thinking, that is the Western way of thinking and representing the world as something other, is the violence. And what I'm trying to say, that in order to create, using this word, a more responsible science, a more responsible research and innovation, this is where we need to go back. This is the violence that we need to reflect upon. Are there alternatives? Of course there are. Yes, there are a number of indigenous alternatives. There are a number of alternatives how what is traditionally called as pseudoscience, which are not pseudo at all, but they are alternative ways of thinking, imagine worlds.
Alternative worldviews.
Pardon?
Sorry to interrupt you. Alternative worldviews.
Alternative worldviews. Another one I'm very much interested in is what's called small island ontologies. So how small islands and small island people imagine themselves and their entangled beings, as opposed to mainland ontologies, as it's called. So mainland ontologies are, you know, big universalist, nature, culture, whatever, binaries, whereas small island ontologies are aware that what I think here on this very specific island might be very different from what somebody else thinks at another island, and very different from how other people imagine the world at the third island. So there is already an inbuilt element of non-universalism, because my island is my island, my thinking is my thinking, but others think differently. So my violence is only my violence, and his violence is his violence. And that's already, I think, a step forward, because there is then no universalist violence that then coerces everybody to have to live in one world that is imagined in a very particular way. Anyway, but this leads far away, but thank you very much for the comment, because yes, absolutely, I agree with it to some extent. Ashish, and then we have to stop and give the word to the students. Yes, Ashish, go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of the distinction you have drawn between the cyborg and the idiot, now, you know, quite a contrast to what Dr. Bhadri said about the maker of those vehicles. I would actually talk about the user of the road. Now, in terms of it, the user of the road becoming another extension of automobility, in the sense that, you know, he or she is embedded within the class, cultural, and gendered relations that exist within society, and that, you know, it may be a case of causing self-harm as a behavioral reaction to the violence caused by automobility, as in when automobiles move in a forceful manner upon signaling and they stop to an abrupt halt, the reaction of the pedestrian is moderated by the signaling and the release of the vehicle. But in, you know, in a cultural context, like when you have people who are not encultured into this context, or because of gendered relations feel conscious about the, you know, use of the road, they tend to, you know, have certain performative relations with regard to the artifacts, where they actually react abnormally. You know, they wouldn't entirely be harmless, as you mentioned, but they could actually be people who are causing harm to themselves in the process. So, you know, by virtue of just the reaction to what you said, and most importantly, you know, this somewhere invisibilizes the user of the road. You know, somewhere by saying somebody is an idiot in the, you know, conceptualization, you know, from the time Carl Benz invented that car, the first user of his own car was his wife. You know, and the condition, you know, there's a fantastic account in this book called Mother of Invention by Catherine Merkel in chapter 2, where she actually uses a hairpin to unclog one of the fuel pipes, and what she does with the braking when placed on a hill, you know, how she uses people to make sure the vehicle moves, and then how it comes down. And in contrast to this, you know, in the hills, in the Indian hilly regions, you know, there is the rule of the road, or the convention, where a bigger vehicle makes way for a smaller vehicle if they're on a road which is slightly in the hilly regions or upper reaches of the hills. Now, that kind of self-evident logic exists to people even who are less educated. but more, people in urban areas or urban spaces who are more civilized, educated, encultured into the culture of automobility still don't respect those kind of conventions or don't generate those kind of conventions. So if you see the sharp contrast in who is an idiot and to what extent his behavior is normal or abnormal, harming or self-harming, is actually a construction of society. We tend to believe that somebody who is less educated cannot see the signal, cannot understand how to move on the road. We see certain classes of people as, generically abnormal. But there are cases where they may actually be more intelligent than those so-called intelligent people that we are referring to.
Thank you for the comment. And I think this opens up again a huge can of worms that we can discuss. But I just want to react in two ways. My version of the idiotes, that is the idiot, has nothing to do with the modern interpretation of the idiot. So it's not intelligent or less intelligent. It's not more cultured or less cultured. It is an amateur politician. That's the only definition. Idiotes is in traditional philosophy now explored in contrast with the rhetorist, with the professional politician of the city. So I am not alluding to the less cultured or the less educated or the less learned, but I'm alluding to a person who has less power. And this then connects to the self-harm. I'm not using terms like normal or abnormal, but what I try to say is that in my world or my political interpretation of automobility, violence is not a contingent individual event, harm, self-harm, etc. But it is a constitutive power role within this world. So maybe, and this is how I write about this, I'm not even using the word violence, but I'm using power violence. And this is what I allude to, which is an operator, a constitutive operator of this ontology that is the world, that is automobility. So individual harm, yes, neither harm inflicted on others and harm inflicted on oneself, self-harm. I don't think that we can imagine a world in which harm does not exist, multifold harms. However, we may be able to imagine a world in which power violence, at least not in this generic and extremely enormous form, exists, and in which other forms of violence other than physical, that is epistemic violence and ontological violence and slow, that is indirect, time and temporal and spatially indirect violence is somehow excluded. That's the world I can imagine to be created as a post-automobility world. So if I want to define post-automobility, then I would define it, at least as a vision, as a world that is void of epistemic, slow, and ontological violence. That is the remit of automobility as I see it. I hope that this clarified. I'm sorry, but today I don't think we have more time because I don't want to take away time from students' presentations. I see two more hands. So let's give a very quick opportunity to these two, Ayesha and Siddharth. Please be quick, and I'll also try to respond shortly, and then we can hand over to the students. So Ayesha.
Thank you so much. Sir, I wanted to know that the motivation for research in the intelligent transportation system, intelligent vehicle, autonomous vehicle, driver assistance system is basically to increase the road safety, right? And decrease accidents and the automobility violence, as you put it. So I just wanted to know your opinion on this.
Thank you very much. Quick question, quick answer. I hate it. I think that it is only reducing accidents in the imagination of the engineers. And I think that connected and autonomous driving is automobility. All the violence that we see today in automobility will be present, and not even physical violence will be reduced, because it will be more automobility, it will be more vehicles on the road, more trouble will come, more awaying would come, as Ashish has alluded to. It doesn't take into consideration cultural, political, etc. differences. So I am not a fan of autonomous or connected automobility. Sorry to say so. Siddharth.
Thank you so much.
Sir, to add to Aisha ma'am's question, actually, I want to know, like, why automobility? Like, you have given this, imagination of a thanatopolitical, nomocratic automobility definition. Why that? Why not something? Why not imagining with a different perspective? Probably like imagining things by cyberspace perspective, perhaps. I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. First and foremost, I hate you now. I saw you that you're sitting outside in the warm weather, so maybe I shouldn't ask people to turn on their cameras, because it's so. I see that it's good for you, and I also made you laugh. That's good. So, well, there are multiple answers for this. One, I am an academic, and an academic I define as someone who is genuinely interested in some part of the world. And I am genuinely interested in automobility, and why we accept that 85 million people have died, and why are we coerced into this political ontology that is automobility. This is my interest. Equally, I am interested in cyberspace. So tomorrow we will hear about that interest of mine. But I am not saying that, as I said time and again, that this is the only world that we live in. So there are others who imagine other worlds, maybe similarly dangerous, maybe similarly violent, or having some other constitutive element as its governing rationality or its constitutive world making. And these worlds are parallel, and we live in multiple worlds. So this is extremely hard to imagine. I know I'm a philosopher, so this is the jargon I speak, because in a traditional realist way of thinking, one imagines to be living in one reality, and that reality only, and that's the totality of everything in which we live. But in my ontological way of thinking, we live in multiple realities, and we live in these multiple realities also in multiple temporal and spatial settings. And this will become relevant, especially the spatial element, when we speak of cyberspace, which is clearly easily imaginable as another space. So this is my answer. My answer is twofold. One, I'm genuinely interested. B, there are multiple such worlds, out of which one is my interest, that is automobility, and others are doing other stuff with other worlds.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Okay, guys. So I hand over to Anup, and he will be the master of ceremony for the student presentation, and I'll obviously stay and listen and be inspired.
Okay, thank you, Professor Robert Brown, for your wonderful presentations as well as interactive session. And we had very provocative questions from the audience. Now it is time for the students' presentation. So I have got 3 names so far. And first I would like to call upon Swati Kumari for her presentation. Are you ready? Swati?
Yes, sir. I was just unmuting myself. So I've shared my slides with you. Can you share them, or I need to share them from my laptop only?
Yeah.
There are only 3 slides actually.
Is it possible for you to share, because my
I'll just try.
Okay, because okay.
You'll have to make her the co-host to enable sharing.
Anup, I think you have to make Swati the co-host.
Okay, I have done it.
Now I'm supposed to share my this thing. Please guide me.
Yeah, there is a button, share screen.
Okay, share screen, yeah.
Okay. After clicking here, you have to specify which application you want to share. If it is PowerPoint.
So I don't see any option for sharing still.
There is no share screen option.
No, there is not.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a share screen option, but I don't know. It's asking only for one participant can share at a time, multiple participant can share, but it's not like showing from where I can share my screen. Like I've opened my PowerPoint on my laptop screen, and then I want.
Okay. Just wait a minute, and I will try to share your screen. My machine is very slow, so please wait for a minute. This application is open.
Yeah, now I can see it.
You can see it. Is it okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
All right.
Yeah, so I'll start my presentation now. So this is one part of the presentation is based on one objective of my research work, PhD research work. And it's like conceptualizing women's safety for future public transportation by using RRI framework. So next slide. So yeah, so I have framed the presentation around 3 questions. Why responsible innovation framework for this type of questions, which I am addressing, and what kind of RI innovation framework, because there are multiple type of responsible innovation frameworks, and there is considerable difference in the global north perspective, global south perspective, and within global south, we are seeing different different type of thoughts are emerging around responsible innovation. So why responsible innovation, what kind of responsible innovation framework I've used, and how I have used that responsible innovation framework. So I'll start with why responsible innovation framework. So I'm working on women's safety in public transportation. So I'll give a little bit of context and background of my research. When we were preparing for after MPhil, we were selecting our research topics or titles. Then I wanted to work on women's safety issue in public transportation. And at that time, I didn't realize I was also having that kind of mindset, which was like engineer's myth, like I'm engineer, I'll provide solution. So I thought, yes, women's safety is a problem and we need to solve this. Like we need to make public transportation more safe for women and everything. Then I started going through literatures and everything. Then I could not come across even a single holistic definition. What is safe is not defined actually. So we had a discussion. I had a discussion with my supervisor even before like completing my synopsis. He asked me to go to field and do a preliminary survey. So I get something like what kind of questions I should be asking, or what are relevant questions. So I went to there's a place called Munirka. It's very near to our university. And this was the area where in 2012, a gang rape case happened in a bus. And after that, it has become a very what to say, hot topic, and it's been included in the political manifestos, and women's safety, especially in mobile or this transiting environment or in public transportation. It's been included in the manifestos, it's been debated in the parliaments, but never ever it has been defined what is like safe. And what is like, there's no like, yeah, we need to make things safe for women, that's it. Like, and there's an issue of safety. And so I went to the field, and then what I was thinking in the beginning, that I'll go for very this thing, qualitative thing. I'll conduct a survey. I ask questions, very like straightforward questions, and then everything will be like, I'll collect the data. So I started asking to the females, actually those who were like actually using the public transport buses. So I asked them, do you feel safe in public transportation? Most of them actually said no. And then my next question was like, what is safe for you? And what I get in the response was the like blank stares. They didn't had the language, they didn't had like how to define like what is, they can tell about like their feel and safe. That was the time when I realized we need to decode what is this feel and what is this safe. So this become a very big challenge, because there is no, till now even, there is no literature available which defines like safe from in a very democratic or diversified way, assembling like lot of views and then saying this is the safe. And again, we need to work to achieve towards this safe, or this safe is coming from the stakeholders, actually from the women themselves. So why I chose the responsible innovation framework? Because my research problem was a very wicked problem. Here, problem itself was not defined. I have to do a lot of initial field work to define that problem itself. So, for instance, like the responsible innovation framework, as we have discussed in the whole in the last week and this week also, it provides the space for redefining actually. it like concept, because the other innovation frameworks which I have studied, like cluster innovation, national innovations, and this thing, nowhere there is a space like to redefining or to include an action orientation into that, like workable. And most of the times, like innovation is already happened, and it's like documenting that innovation, how it happened, and this thing and that thing. But like action orientation and plus historicity, like why, how, what is the like context of evolving of a problem, or this thing was missing actually. So responsible innovation framework appealed to me, and there's a scope for empathic understanding. I'll come back to it in the next slide also, why this is important, especially for when we are working on those topics where the stakeholders themselves do not have the kind of language. Then we need to put them ourselves into their shoes and understand a lot of issues. And then responsible innovation framework also provided for, not only because in my MPhil topic, I worked on this eco-innovation framework. It definitely have environmental consideration, but not social sustainability. It was not talking about. And economic sustainability have been like part of lot of innovation framework. So the social sustainability aspect also was very relevant to the kind of research I was conducting. So next slide. So what RRI is actually? So I've been presented in multiple conferences, like presented in Leiden, in Graz, and in Berlin. And I've been in touch with people who are working into RI. So I see a considerable difference in between like what is the understanding of responsible innovation in global north and global south. First thing is like the cultural differences are not taken into very much account in the global north. Because there are universal values. Yes, there is a focus on universal values over there, like environmental sustainability and then all those things. But there are social shaping, we say, and we say co-creation. Then because these are like humans and with agencies and with already having conditions, all these conditions come into picture when we actually go for innovations or anything. So these things we need to take into account. So I have taken a definition of responsible innovation which is more conducive to our country's landscape or where I was working, because my case study is situated in Delhi. So responsible innovation means being caring or ensuring care for certain values for socio-economic and environmental sustainability by engaging in anticipation, reflexivity, responsiveness, deliberation, and participation for bringing up any challenge in any idea, product, process, method, way of business, and technology to bring in specific market or use in specific societies. So there are like basically 5 dimensions, and these dimensions also provide for methods how to and these 5 dimensions are not like vertical, they are simultaneous actually. So anticipation is like what we have already talked, that like taking care of future in the present. Reflexivity is like creating a mirror image from the stakeholders perspective actually. This is very important actually, to be reflexive. And then responsiveness is iterative process, so again and again going back to the stakeholders. And deliberation is this is another actually very interesting point, because in the especially in Netherlands framework, what I've seen in Delft and all those places, that they mostly consider deliberation and participation one and the same actually. But in Indian context, particularly, deliberation and participation becomes different because the power dynamics is different. With experts you can go for like deliberation, but for participation actually stakeholders need to be participated. So I think like face-to-face in-depth interviews or workshops are much more conducive way for participation of stakeholders. So next slide. So how I have applied this RI? So first thing I went on to I did multiple rounds of surveys actually. There's been like 4 rounds of surveys, 3 before COVID pandemic and 1 after COVID pandemic. So the impact of COVID-19 pandemic could also be taken into account. And then these surveys has been conducted into the again and again, not new stakeholders which I have contacted in the first time. Again, I went to them and again. And then every time I took the findings and I refined my questionnaire again and again. Like it's kind of what Robert was talking about, like social lab, but it was not, I didn't have those kind of resources or place to set up a social lab, but like I did it on my own. So, yeah. So, so the questions itself was framed from the stakeholders' perspective. That was the first starting point. Like, not like what is safe or something, what they feel actually. And then I went on from like modifying from, I gave up on quantitative survey after first round. Then it was a qualitative survey. And then after that, it was like more of experience sharing exercises with the women stakeholders. And they provided very rich data, and through that it was much more like intensive kind of thing to capture their aspirations. And then based on this thing, the values, 23 values has been identified, which has been shared with like those who are innovators in this field. And then it's a how they can, and then with them the deliberation happened, like how they can include these values at the ideation of the innovation level of itself. Because once the innovation comes out and then we want to embed something, it becomes very difficult. There's a lot of inertia about such ideas. And then about these values, certain indicators has been identified. And there are conflicting values also, especially for this thing, privacy, surveillance, like, and it's a very, ultimately we have reached a very inclusive, relevant concept of women's safety, which has been, which has provided like many, what to say, for the first time insights into the women's safety in public transportation. For instance, till now, I've not came across even a single study who's taking a reproductive stage, on which reproductive cycle stage a woman is. That's a safety concern actually for a women. I've not seen even a single study which is taking into like menstruation, menopause, or a small child or pregnancy into account. And I have taken into like age also, like 4 or 5 groups of age of women. And then with that education level, different education level, because that also affects the perception about, and then income level, what is their income level. And then I have seen all these things with time and space. And it's very interesting to see that like time in science, or in like in otherwise also we see time, because the watches came after industrial revolution, and time become very objective criteria. It's very objective. And then 6 o'clock means 6 o'clock. No, it is not like that actually. It's very subjective, and I can say it from my research and personal experience. Because suppose traveling in a public bus in the night, 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock means very different for a female than a male. And then that time is also vary with the space. In center, that time has a different meaning for female itself, located in center, and very different meaning of female located in the peripheral areas. And similarly, time varies with season. Like in summers, it's like 10 o'clock might not be that late, but in winters, it's very late actually. And then it's also related with the dark hours. And so I have tried to include all those things and provided a very inclusive, relevant, and very democratic, and what to say, diversified concept of female safety. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati, for a wonderful presentation. So, Professor Robert, do you have any observation?
I am familiar with Swati's work because she has been in Graz with some colleagues of mine. So I like what she's doing a lot, and I think it's very relevant and important. And as she knows, I would be very happy to host her here in Vienna if we find a way to provide her funding. So
Sure, I would love to.
I just said, by the way, Swati, I just sent you something in the chat. Please check it out.
Okay, sir, I will.
So no comments on my side. I think this is very relevant, important. The only comment I make is one maybe. I mentioned yesterday about the paper that I just reviewed, which was also dealing with safety, or rather unsafety, and arguing very convincingly, actually, that unsafety, while as Swati presented, obviously is a feeling, emotion, a subject defined being in the world. However, once it is elevated to levels of governance, which obviously research innovation is one form, then it easily becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and a quantified measure of, again, leading to command and control. In that paper, the example was Sweden, where certain people felt unsafe in certain environments, and thus a lot of governance power was brought in to address the unsafety, mainly private contractors, guarding, etc. And this led to a very oppressive form of governmentality, and also substituting rather policy or social oriented activities with policing. So what I can add is, while I understand Swati's academic perspective, I don't think that safety per se is a silver bullet, or attending to female safety is a silver bullet of solving multifold and multiple problems within automobility. And so I think, but I know that Swati doesn't think that it is. But this is kind of, yes, the value orientation. So kind of, this is how hard it is to understand the real stakes, because you tend to pick one element and you build a whole governance framework around that, and then there are unintended impacts or consequences. But yes, I think what Swati does is very important.
So, is there any comment from the audience or from the participant? So, if there is no more comment, so I like to invite S. Priyanka Devi for your presentation. Priyanka Devi, are you ready?
Yes, sir. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Priyanka Devi. Today I'm going to present a paper titled on academic competence in higher education through RRI framework. The culture of higher education is based on Western or mainstream culture. And such culture believes that talking and thinking are interrelated concepts, and whereas Eastern culture believes that talking might interrupt the thought process. The notion of competence is not the same in our society. Instead, it's a socially constructed and inference of self and others. Students from minority and less privileged background tend to be less self-expressive and fall behind competence. Often, minority students inexpressive behavior in educational setting is caused by a lack of English proficiency. But even if they know well also.
Good evening, Balaji. How are you?
But even,
I'm also fine.
But even if they know well also, they prefer to be silent and believe that self-introspection is the key to self-improvement. Students also divert from acceptable cultural norms, are depicted as culturally deficit rather than viewed as cultural differences. And the present study didn't deny that academic understanding or knowledge is an essential factor of being competent, but rather the paper argues on monocultural practice in educational setting. And I'm using RRI framework because the domain of RRI is based on inclusiveness, principally focus on.
Priyanka, can you go on with the slides? Because now we still see the introduction slides. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. But I don't know. But here's what to do. Sir, is it changing?
No, we only see, or I see only the introduction slide.
Oh. What to do?
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. Stop scrolling and then. I'll share again. Let me see. So. Sir, is it change? It changes? Did it change?
Yes, now it's fine. Now we see the purpose of the study.
Okay.
Can you go to the RRI framework, that's slide 4?
Okay.
Yes, it works now. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I'll carry on then. The domain of RRI.
You start with purpose. Purpose of the study. You just briefly tell about purpose.
Okay, I'll do that.
Previous slide.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I can see.
The purpose of study is like students from minority and less privileged background tend to be less self-expressive and fall behind academic competence. Often minority students are inexpressive and in educational setting, it's mainly caused by the lack of English proficiency. But even if they know well also, they try to be, they prefer to be silent and believe that self-introspection is the key to be self-improvement. And students, those who divert from acceptable cultural norms are depicted as a cultural deficit rather than being as cultural differences. And the present paper didn't deny that academic understanding is an essential factor of being competent. Rather, the paper argues on monocultural practice in educational setting. And I'm using RRI framework. The domain of RRI is based on inclusiveness. It principally focuses on research and innovation content and process to better advancement of the society, and also aiming to enable the research and innovation, and the policy would be socially oriented and expect its outcomes to be efficient, and beneficial to the larger society. And in educational setting, there are two types of students: smart and non-smart, competent and incompetent. Many students are against this mindset. Not all reticent students are having a lack of academic knowledge. Sometimes it's also related to respecting their home culture. Students experiencing cultural similarities or differences in educational culture affect their academic outcomes. Students from non-mainstream or minority backgrounds experience marked cultural difference in educational setting, so they suffer the most and tend to drop out. So here the summary is, members of the minority and less privileged background, less representation in educational settings are denied of equal access. If we look historically, higher education is about members of the upper middle class or members of the affluent family background. The social advantages of group transferring into the social asset and cultural capital transit through earlier generation to the present. A compensatory policy is required. The knowledge application is acceptable when we embed it with the community. Higher learning will not be achievable if we focus only on competence. So a better outcome would generate when we allow diversity and motivate learners. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. So is it a paper you are developing, working paper?
It's an ongoing article.
Okay. So Professor Robert, do you have any observation?
Thank you very much, Priyanka. It was very interesting. I found especially interesting what you said about the difference between the Western and Eastern way of thinking and talking, and how thinking and talking is differently understood in an educational setup or in a cultural context. And I'm very curious about what the paper will actually be. So please send it to me once it's done or published. Because at this point, I see that you are, I mean, maybe this is just the presentation, but there are a number of things that are kind of intertwined in your argument. The social status of students, the cultural contexts, and also some epistemic differences between cultural backgrounds. And I would be very curious how these play out in the end within the RRI framework that you suggest or work with. So once you have the paper ready, I'm very open to reading it even before you submit, and comment on if that's helpful.
Actually, this is the first time I'm encountering RRI framework, so I'm just trying to make sense. Lack of knowledge, I guess. Just trying. Thank you.
Okay, all the best. And we have another presentation by Astha Jaswal. So, are you ready, Astha?
Yes, I'm ready. I need to share screen.
Yeah, you can share your screen if you.
Is my screen visible?
Yeah, it has come.
Actually, I can see there is some interference at my end. I can can see the application on my screen. Okay. Actually, today's presentation is a very small part of my PhD work that I submitted a few months ago. And, as you can see, it's a responsible promise management, or also called as promisomics at the dimension of RRI or RI. Now, I would not discuss much about the methodology I used for this study. I would rather go to the study itself quickly. So, the concept of promissory discourse has been actually given by a few scholars like Shadwick and Watts, who have pointed out that many research fields, science and technology research fields such as genomics or stem cell therapy, proteomics, and so on, are actually characterized by a narrative that is, we can call it as a speculative narrative, also called its promissory discourse. That is, the promises that these research in these fields, the consequences are more in the future and can only be speculated at the present. And in fact, the authors say that a promissory discourse, which the authors call as promisomics, is characterized by exaggerated and inflated claims. And therefore, in order to tackle this, the authors call for applying what they call as responsible promise management to be part of responsible research, and which would actually include clearly articulating feasible promises and expectations related to a research or technology. Now, the subjects of my study were the umbilical cord blood banks, which I've shown on this slide. So there were 14 banks I studied, and I basically I did a content analysis of the promotional material, the website, the brochures, advertisements, and in fact, I even talked to the scientists and doctors in the banks. I talked to the salespeople with whom I consulted regarding umbilical cord blood banking. I held interviews with sales and marketing people of the companies in repeated sessions. And I conducted some case studies, and the findings of the study I analyzed through three frameworks of choice, control, and reassurance. And the findings of the study in this aspect reveal that the cord blood banks actually inform the prospective parents. They provide inadequate and false information regarding the real situations where umbilical cord stem cells could actually be used. In fact, most of the claims they made were, blatantly false and unrealistic. And there was an attempt to play on the parents, especially the pregnant mother's vulnerabilities. A pressure is created, in the minds of the parents that there is a danger, in future the child may fall sick and they have to do the best for the child. And if they do not opt for cord blood banking, they would not be doing enough for the child. And this actually implicitly creates burden of responsibility on would-be parents. Now, in order to control this burden of responsibility and sense of impending urgency, all this narrative creates umbilical cord blood banking as a once in a lifetime opportunity that would be missed by the parents because it can only be utilized at the birth of the child. And in order to tackle with this burden of responsibility and not drink enough, the parents actually opt for cord blood banking in private cord blood banks as a form of reassurance. And this, the banking of umbilical cord blood cells was constructed as a form of reassurance in order to avoid distress and difficulties that would be caused in future, either for the child, siblings, or larger family members. Now, in general, as I have discussed before, it was found in the study that the promotional material and the talks of the cord-blood bank with the parents were actually creating a lot of hype around stem blood cells, and cord blood cells were actually made to look like something of a miracle. Some of the terms that were repeatedly used is, once in a lifetime opportunity, insurance, nature's insurance policy, and as you can see, the slide that I'm showing you, this slide, it has been actually taken from the website of one of the umbilical cord blood banks, and actually this slide tries to present some facts regarding umbilical cord blood bank as facts, whereas the facts are actually represented as myths. I'll show you another slide which says we want to live till 240, so stem cells may make it a reality. So these are actually screenshots from websites of some of the cord blood banks. In conclusion, the study found the narrative of UCB banking market as being, highly exaggerated, inflated, and based on false and unrealistic claims. And in fact, one of the banks, in many banks, they proclaim that stem cells derived from cord blood bank has the capacity to cure, many complex diseases like Alzheimer's, arthritis, asthma, heart disease, diabetes, and so on. In fact, one of them told me that, it can cure even COVID. And, so clearly the banks are actually projecting cord blood bank as something of a miracle, and this is how the narrative was constructed, and it shows clear signs of being a promissory discourse that needs to be paid urgent attention to, and responsible promise management can be an important dimension when it comes to responsible innovation in umbilical cord blood banking. Thank you.
Thank you for your nice presentation. It was nice approach. And any questions from any observation from Professor Bao?
Yes, thank you very much. This was fantastic, really. Very interesting work. Also, the responsible promise management is a very interesting concept. Actually, this stem cell umbilical cord, I am one of the culprits of this unrealistic promise. I have two daughters. One is 20 years old and the other is 15. And 20 years ago, this technology was not available, but 15 years ago it was. And these were exactly the same arguments that were used at the time in a totally different setting. That was Europe. And obviously we fell prey to these miracles that were promised, and also with the urgency that you alluded to, because we thought we are not good parents, especially as this opportunity did not present itself with our previous daughters. So this is something that we must do now. So I think this is great. So I can definitely relate to it as a person and as a father. My question is, or comment rather, is how can you make responsible promises? Again, I'm not in the umbilical cord business, but I am in the automobility business. And so what would be a responsible promise management of a car maker who obviously now through advertising is promising that it's freedom, it's beauty, it's sex, so all this imaginary that surrounds the car. Obviously this is part of the imaginary that doesn't come to be to actually become checked. But what would be a real and responsible promise a car manufacturer could make? I'm killing you, and I'm killing a few more people in the lifetime of the car I'm selling you, through both accidents, slow violence, and the likes. So going beyond the joke, if one accepts, and definitely medical discourse is also an ontology. So that's kind of the classic Anna-Marie Moll ontopolitical text, that actually medical discourse and the enactment of medicine is actually creating worlds, different worlds. And so can you actually make responsible promises within the ontology that sees the umbilical cord and stem cells as a panacea to those multiple diseases that you enlisted on one of your slides? So is it possible? That's my question.
Of course, I think it is possible because as you have seen that the discourse consists of highly inflammatory and false claims. So the claims are realistic, and the would-be parents are given real picture of where cord blood stem cells could really be used. That would be actually great. So it can be dealt with to some extent. At least I think so. And like the parents should be clarified that most of the consequences of the research that are going on in this area are not yet, like they are not yet into the light, and the results are yet unknown, and it would take many more years for them to actually precisely say something. So these are some.
So at least discuss the risks. Risks
Right.
not only in the medical sense, but risks in the coming to fruition of the research that is maybe currently, politically speaking, that's probably something that can be done. I don't know if it solves all the problems that are related in medical world making, but probably this is a discussion to be had. But thank you, great presentation, really great work.
Any other observation from the audience, from the participants? Okay, Madhuri Kumari, you have questions, please.
Indeed, it was a great presentation, Astha. Actually, my concern is that, have you taken the perspective of parents who are taking this type of services or bank account? Have you taken them?
Yes, actually, I have interviewed a few parents who have opted for umbilical cord blood banking, and also many who did not opt, even after they were approached by the umbilical cord blood bank. So yes, I have taken their perspective. Actually,
okay.
That has been, yes.
What was their educational background? What are their economical status like that? Now, what type of that parents?
Most of the parents who had opted for cord blood banking belong to educated. They were educated, and they belong to a certain class, I can say, right? See, actually, if you look at umbilical cord blood bank globally, there are two domains. One is the private domain, and the other one is public. Now, this is not to be confused with public and private in the sense of private companies and public companies. But if you choose to store your cord blood, your baby's cord blood in a private bank. So what you do is you store it like how you store money, how you save money in the bank. It is only for your use. Nobody else can use it. And if you choose to store the cord blood bank with the public cord blood cells with the public bank, anyone who needs it all over the world will be able to use it. And as you know that Indians and Asian people are ethnically a minority, therefore it is very difficult to find related matching stem cells in case they need it anywhere in the world. Therefore, it would be a great idea to have a public infrastructure related to cord blood banking in India, which is absolutely absent. There is not even one public umbilical cord blood bank in India. In fact, there are other issues related to economic sustainability, which is why I think responsible innovation in cord blood banking will have to consider sustainability, economic sustainability too. So the scope of responsible innovation should widen, apart from social and ethical issues. It has to take care of the practical, the practical aspects too. I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Any observation for Priyanka Devi's presentation? So I forward at that time. Any observation for Priyanka Devi's presentation? Okay, Ashish, you have some comments.
Yeah, just one comment on the cord blood banking thing. Don't you think communication is an important aspect or a value in this, considering that there's an information deficit model in science communication, firstly? Secondly, regarding the certainty of the science. Now, to my understanding, since I have a science background, the treatment value of cord blood cell banking is contingent on the notion that animal cells are totipotent or capable of differentiation into multiple organs, or which is the basis of organ cell therapy, or the fact that you can use the same stem cells to make multiple organs should the patient in question develop any abnormalities in those organs. Now, in terms of the concept of treatment value and the understanding of the patient or the person who's donating his stem cells, while it is understood that, stem cells inside the human body do provide for that kind of an effect, but in science, to my understanding, to a few people whom I have spoken to, there is divergence of opinion that whether animal cells are actually totipotent or pluripotent, if I were to use the technical term. So how much is the communication of this fact, this scientific fact, bears upon the decision-making heuristic of, this is that one criteria, perhaps other than infrastructure, the back end, or the fact that there is no indoor management. The very fact that for a person to make a decision to donate his cord blood cell at his birth or at an early stage in life is contingent on what treatment value he is likely to get, which the pharmaceutical system is unlikely to provide him through, artificial chemicals made in the lab. So could you reflect on that aspect?
Of course, the facts that you have mentioned are very pertinent. There is definitely a communication gap here. But as you have seen, this communication is from the cord blood bank providers to the would-be patients. And as I have shown that it is full of unrealistic claims, false claims, blatantly false claims. And coming to the capacity of the cells, like totipotency, pluripotency, of course, there is a debate about it. But yes, nevertheless, I even have, interviewed the doctors who are involved in doing transplantation using umbilical cord blood stem cells, and I've spoken to the doctor who has conducted first cord blood transplantation in India, and there is definitely a need for cord blood bank derived cord blood derived stem cells. But that need is not fulfilled if the cord blood stem cells are privately banked. Like anywhere in the world, there was a professor from, I don't know, Harvard University of Indian origin, and she actually got diagnosed with leukemia. And there was a search, done all over the world for matching stem cells to save her life. But that could not be done in time. Although there was, there was actually a grassroots drive to procure matching stem cells for her. So there is definitely a need for it. But again, the matter is of governance. As I was telling you that public cord blood banking is absolutely absent in India. So that is something that should be thought of. Okay.
Thank you very much. I hope we don't have any other comment or observation from the audience. Is there any comment or observation? And then Professor Robert, so we can conclude the second session of the day. Okay. So now it's time for concluding the second session. So thank you all for your active participation in the presentation as well as in the first session of Professor Robert Brown. So see you tomorrow, and tomorrow morning I'll send you 2 links, one for one evaluation, that is kind of multiple choice questions, and also feedback form. So both are essential for getting certificate from the GIAN. So I hope all you will submit by end of the day tomorrow. So thank you all, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.